Josephine Bonaparte's life reads like a sweeping tale of love, power, and resilience. A story of a woman who captivated an emperor and shaped the destiny of a nation. From the sun-drenched plantations of Martinique to the gilded halls of Parisian palaces, Josephine's journey was far from ordinary. She was not merely the wife of Napoleon, but the woman who navigated the storm of revolution, built bridges between monarchies, and defined an era with her grace and ambition. Her story is one of survival, sacrifice, and ultimately, a legacy that would forever echo through history. Born in Martinique and crowned as Empress of the French, Josephine Bonaparte occupies a unique and enigmatic place in history. She was a woman of contrasts, exotic yet European, refined yet scandalous, politically marginalized yet immensely influential. Though her name is often mentioned in the shadow of her famous husband, Napoleon Bonaparte, Josephine was far more than just a consort. She was a vital force behind the scenes, a cultural icon, and a symbol of transformation during one of the most turbulent periods in European history. Her life, marked by personal survival, strategic brilliance, and emotional complexity, not only mirrors the rise and fall of an empire, but also reveals the hidden power wielded by women in a male-dominated world. At first glance, Josephine's life appears to be a tale of luck. How a widow from a distant Caribbean island caught the eye of a young Corsican general and became empress. But the real story is much deeper. She was born Marie-Joseph Rose Tascher de la Pagerie in 1763 on a sugar plantation in Martinique, a place that molded her early identity in ways often overlooked. Her colonial upbringing gave her a distinct charm and worldliness that set her apart in the salons of post-revolutionary Paris. She learned early on to navigate complex social structures and to survive in environments dominated by ambition, deceit, and power. Josephine's first marriage to Alexander de Beauharnais, a nobleman who later became a victim of the guillotine during the French Revolution, was far from ideal. Yet, through this marriage, she gained entry into the aristocracy of France and bore two children, Eugene and Hortense, who would later play critical roles in Napoleon's dynastic plans. Her imprisonment during the Reign of Terror, a terrifying period where thousands were executed for political dissent, could have easily ended her story. Instead, it became a crucible of transformation. When she emerged, it was with a resilience and grace that would come to define her public persona. It was in the chaotic aftermath of the revolution that she met Napoleon Bonaparte. He was 10 years her junior, brash, ambitious, and at the beginning of his legendary military career. Their marriage in 1796 was both a love story and a political alliance. Though they came from vastly different backgrounds, he, the provincial general with dreams of conquest, and she, the seasoned survivor of Parisian politics, they complemented each other in surprising ways. Napoleon was captivated by her elegance, poise, and social skills. She, in turn, understood his ambition and the kind of support he needed. Despite infidelities, political rifts, and emotional volatility, their relationship endured far longer than many expected. Josephine was not a politician in the conventional sense. She did not hold office or draft policy. Yet her influence was undeniable. She acted as an intermediary, a social diplomat who brokered favor in court, disarmed rivals with charm, and built networks that strengthened Napoleon's position. She was a patron of the arts, a fashion trendsetter, and a powerful presence at court. While Napoleon conquered territories, Josephine conquered hearts and minds. Her impact was felt not only in the drawing rooms of the Tuileries Palace, but also in the wider cultural realm of Europe, where her taste and style set trends that would last long beyond the empire. The height of Josephine's public life came with Napoleon's coronation in 1804. In a moment heavy with symbolism, she was crowned empress by Napoleon himself, a break from tradition that underscored her unique place in his world. It was both a personal triumph and a political statement. However, as Napoleon's dreams of a dynasty grew more pressing, the couple's inability to produce an heir became a critical issue. Despite their deep emotional bond and shared history, Napoleon made the painful decision to divorce Josephine in 1810, choosing a politically strategic marriage to Archduchess Marie-Louise of Austria. Their separation, while publicly staged as dignified and mutually agreed, was deeply personal and marked the beginning of a slow withdrawal of Josephine from the world stage. Yet, even in exile from court, Josephine remained a central figure in Napoleon's heart and memory. She retired to the Château de Malmaison, a place that would become synonymous with her name. There, she continued to influence politics indirectly, hosted international figures, and curated her legacy through art, correspondence, and her children's futures. Both her son and daughter went on to cement alliances that would shape European politics for decades, linking Josephine to the royal houses of Belgium, Sweden, and beyond. The story of Josephine is inextricably linked to that of the Bonaparte dynasty itself, a dynasty that rose from the ashes of revolution, reshaped Europe through war and law, and collapsed under the weight of its own ambition. Josephine was present for the rise, and although formally removed before the fall, her emotional and symbolic presence endured. When Napoleon was exiled and isolated in his final days on St. Helena, it was Josephine he spoke of with longing and regret. Her memory outlived the imperial titles and military conquests, rooted not in power or policy, but in grace, elegance, and the intimate understanding of empire from a woman's point of view. Marie-Joseph Rose Tascher de la Pagerie, known to history as Josephine Bonaparte, was born on June 23, 1763, on the island of Martinique in the French West Indies. Her birthplace was the sugar plantation of Les Trois Islets, located along the lush and humid Caribbean coast. The world into which she was born was one of sharp contrasts: beauty and brutality, privilege and powerlessness, luxury and labor. As a white Creole girl raised on a plantation, Josephine's early life was marked by the peculiar dynamics of colonial society, shaped not only by her French ancestry, but also by the brutal legacy of slavery and the social hierarchy of the French colonial empire. Her father, Joseph Gaspard Tascher de la Pagerie, came from a once noble French family that had fallen into relative poverty. Like many members of the French lesser nobility in the colonies, he had traveled to the Caribbean to make his fortune in agriculture and trade. The Tascher family had been granted a sizable plot of land by the French crown, and it was here that they developed a working sugar plantation that relied heavily on enslaved labor, a grim but inescapable fact of Caribbean plantation life in the 18th century. Her mother, Rose Claire de Vergers de Senoise, also hailed from a Creole family of modest noble background. The union of her parents was as much a business alliance as it was a family one, aimed at preserving social status and securing economic survival in a volatile colony. Though the Tascher family held the title of nobility and owned land, their fortunes were far from secure. The plantation, while impressive in scope, was not always profitable. The unpredictable nature of agriculture, combined with debt and the constant threat of hurricanes and disease, made life precarious. Still, to the eyes of young Rose, who would not yet be known as Josephine, the estate was a vast world of flowering gardens, palm trees, and shimmering Caribbean light. Her childhood was a mix of tropical beauty and harsh colonial reality, a duality that would remain a constant theme throughout her life. As a Creole, meaning a person of European descent born in the colonies, Josephine grew up with a distinctly different identity from her counterparts raised in mainland France. The Creole culture in Martinique blended French aristocratic customs with local traditions, infused with the rhythms, sounds, and colors of the Caribbean. French was the language of the elite, but Creole dialects were also spoken, especially among servants and the enslaved population. The Catholic Church held sway over community life, and religious instruction was an important part of a young girl's upbringing. Yet, amid these formal structures, there was a certain looseness in Creole society, a flair for improvisation, elegance, and emotional intensity that differed from the rigid etiquette of Paris. Education for girls in the colonies was generally limited, but Josephine received enough to make her socially adept. She was taught to read and write, learned catechism, and acquired the basics of etiquette, music, and dancing, skills that would be essential in French aristocratic society. Her early instruction came either from private tutors or local nuns, and while it was not academically rigorous, it emphasized manners, charm, and poise. More than books, her greatest lessons came from watching and listening, absorbing the way her mother hosted guests, negotiated with merchants, or managed the household staff. Josephine learned early that in a society where women held little formal power, influence could still be exerted through grace, persuasion, and subtlety. The plantation itself was a complex microcosm of colonial life. At its heart was the great house, where the Tascher family lived in relative comfort. Surrounding it were the slave quarters, sugar mills, and the fields that stretched across the landscape. Hundreds of enslaved Africans worked the land, cut cane, processed sugar, and performed domestic tasks. From a young age, Josephine would have been aware of their presence, their suffering, and their essential role in maintaining her family's way of life. While she likely did not question the morality of slavery as a child, Given its institutional normalcy in her world, it undeniably shaped her understanding of power, hierarchy, and race. These early impressions of authority and social division would influence how she later navigated the politics of the French court. The physical environment of Martinique also left a lasting imprint on her. The island's dramatic landscapes, with their tropical forests, volcanoes, and coastal breezes, inspired in Josephine a lifelong love of nature and beauty. This affection would later manifest in her passion for horticulture and exotic plants, especially during her years at Malmaison, where she cultivated rare botanical specimens from around the world. Martinique's rich flora and fauna, along with its sensual atmosphere, gave her an innate appreciation for color, scent, and texture, traits that contributed to her legendary sense of style and decor. Social standing was everything in colonial Martinique, and even among the white elite, distinctions were sharp. The Tascher family, though of noble origin, occupied a middle position, above the Petits Blancs, poor whites, and gens de couleur libres, free people of color, but below the wealthiest plantation families who held sway over colonial politics. This ambiguous social positioning made Josephine acutely aware of status and appearance from a young age. Her family's precarious financial situation meant they had to project an image of nobility while constantly fearing economic decline. This pressure fostered in her an ability to adapt, to play roles, and to win favor, skills she would later deploy with masterful subtlety in Parisian salons and imperial courts. When Josephine was a child, the world around her was changing. The Enlightenment was sweeping through Europe, stirring new ideas about rights, society, and governance. While these concepts had not yet reached the isolated shores of Martinique in any significant way, the social tensions they stirred would eventually erupt into revolutions, first in France, then in the colonies. By the time Josephine left the island in her teens, the seeds of these transformations were already taking root. But to the girl known simply as Rose, the island was still a world of mango trees, bright dresses, and whispered stories told by candlelight. It was a place of intense experience, of sensory richness and emotional extremes. In 1779, when Josephine was about 16, her family saw an opportunity to secure their future through a strategic marriage. Her cousin, who had been engaged to a French aristocrat named Alexander de Beauharnais, died unexpectedly, and the family decided to send Josephine to France to take her place. It was a dramatic shift, from the sun-soaked rhythms of Martinique to the formal, often cold world of metropolitan France. The journey across the Atlantic was long and dangerous, but it marked the beginning of a new chapter. She left behind her Creole childhood, her family, and the island that had shaped her, stepping into a world where her grace, poise, and adaptability would be tested on an entirely new stage. The identity she carried from Martinique, shaped by its blend of cultures, its unspoken tensions, and its aesthetic richness, never left her. Even when she was crowned Empress of the French, she remained, at heart, the girl from the tropics. Her accent, though softened, carried traces of her birthplace. Her gestures, her tastes, her aura bore the imprint of the Caribbean. It gave her a certain exotic charm that fascinated the Parisians and bewildered the French aristocracy. She was not one of them, and yet she moved among them with such fluidity and confidence that they could not ignore her. Josephine's early life in Martinique thus provided the foundation for everything that followed. The island shaped her sense of self, her understanding of social navigation, and her intuitive grasp of beauty and power. It taught her how to survive in a world that was often unstable and cruel, how to win allies through charm, and how to mask vulnerability behind elegance. These early lessons, learned far from the glittering courts of Europe, were precisely what enabled her to rise so high in a society that offered women few avenues for power. The girl born Marie-Joseph Rose Tascher de la Pagerie would go on to become not just the wife of an emperor, but one of the most intriguing figures in French history, forever marked by the sunlight and shadows of her island home. In 1779, at the age of 16, Josephine Tascher de la Pagerie was sent from Martinique to France to marry a man she had never met. The original engagement had been between Alexander de Beauharnais and Josephine's cousin, but after the cousin's untimely death, the family saw fit to substitute Josephine as a suitable replacement. The match was not only socially desirable, but strategically necessary. For a Creole family with declining fortunes, securing a marriage with a metropolitan aristocrat offered an opportunity to preserve noble status and build influence in France. Alexander de Beauharnais was a young officer with noble blood and a promising future. Elegant, intelligent, and ambitious, he seemed, at least on paper, like the ideal husband for a young woman of colonial birth. However, from the beginning, the marriage was marred by incompatibility. Josephine, raised amid the looser social codes of Martinique, found the rigid structures of Parisian high society suffocating. Her Creole accent and provincial manners marked her as an outsider among the elite. Alexander, for his part, quickly grew disillusioned with his bride. He criticized her for her perceived lack of sophistication and complained about her upbringing and appearance. Their letters from that period reveal a relationship devoid of affection and marked by cold distance. Despite these tensions, the couple had 2 children, Eugene, born in 1781, and Hortense, born in 1783. Josephine's devotion to her children would become one of the most enduring aspects of her character. She poured herself into their care, perhaps as a means of finding stability in a deeply unhappy marriage. While Alexander pursued his career and romantic liaisons elsewhere, Josephine focused on her role as a mother, trying to shield Eugene and Hortense from the discontent at home. The family resided in various locations, sometimes together, often apart, and by 1785, the strain between Josephine and Alexander became unbearable. They formally separated, a common enough occurrence among the aristocracy, though it carried social risks, particularly for women. Josephine's position as a separated wife with 2 young children placed her in a vulnerable situation. She had no independent fortune, limited family support in France, and few connections that could sustain her socially or financially. However, her natural charm, poise, and quiet intelligence allowed her to survive in Parisian society, even in its more precarious circles. She began to attend salons, intellectual gatherings hosted by influential women, where her gentleness and wit gained her modest favor. Though she remained on the margins of power, she learned to navigate the city's complicated web of relationships, hierarchies, and social customs. Her early experiences in the colonial world, where adaptability and grace were essential, served her well during these uncertain years. As Josephine worked to sustain herself and raise her children, the political landscape around her was beginning to shift dramatically. In 1789, the French Revolution erupted, tearing through the ancien regime and turning the established order on its head. For aristocrats and those tied to the old monarchy, the years that followed were filled with danger and confusion. Alexander de Beauharnais, who had previously supported some revolutionary reforms, soon found himself caught in the crosscurrents of change. He held a series of military and political posts during the early years of the Revolution, and was even president of the National Assembly for a brief period. However, his noble birth and association with moderate factions made him a target when the Revolution entered its most violent phase. The Reign of Terror, which began in 1793, was a period of extreme political purging led by the Jacobins under Maximilien Robespierre. During this time, thousands of people, nobles, clergy, former revolutionaries, and common citizens, were arrested and executed as enemies of the Republic. Alexander de Beauharnais, once a proud revolutionary, was now viewed with suspicion. Accused of treason and failing to properly defend the city of Mainz, he was arrested and imprisoned in early 1794. Josephine, though estranged from her husband, was not spared. She too was arrested, partly because of her association with Alexander, and partly because her social connections made her suspect in the eyes of the new regime. She was taken to the Carmis prison in Paris, where she was held alongside other political prisoners. Her imprisonment marked one of the darkest chapters of her life. The conditions in Carmis were brutal. Overcrowded cells, limited food, fear of disease, and the constant dread of execution. Every day, names were read aloud of those who would be taken to the guillotine. The sound of the tumbrils, the carts carrying prisoners to their death, echoed through the prison halls. While in Carmis, Josephine tried to maintain her composure. Her natural grace and softness won her a few allies among the prisoners, and she became something of a maternal figure to some of the younger women incarcerated with her. Her children were left in the care of friends and guardians, but she worried constantly about their fate. She had few means of communication with the outside world, and each passing day heightened her anxiety. Then, in July 1794, a dramatic shift occurred. Robespierre himself was arrested and executed in what became known as the Thermidorian reaction. His death marked the end of the Reign of Terror and brought a wave of reprieve for many prisoners. Josephine was among those released. Upon emerging from prison, she found that her husband had not been so fortunate. Alexander de Beauharnais had been executed by guillotine just days before Robespierre's fall. Though their marriage had been deeply troubled, his death affected her profoundly. He was the father of her children, and a figure who had once represented her hopes for security in France. Now she was a widow with little money, 2 children to raise, and no clear path forward. Yet it was during this period of post-terror instability that Josephine began to reshape her life. She re-entered Parisian society cautiously, drawing on the network of friends she had made before her imprisonment. The political mood had shifted once more. The Jacobins had lost favor, and the Directory, a 5-member committee, now governed France. This new regime, while still revolutionary, was less radical and more accepting of those who had ties to the old order, provided they posed no threat. Josephine's background, once a liability, now gave her an exotic appeal. She began to frequent salons again, mingling with powerful men, artists, and intellectuals who admired her resilience and charm. She also found protection and patronage in the form of influential lovers and friends. Her relationship with Paul Barras, one of the directors, proved particularly important. Barras was a central figure in the government and helped re-establish Josephine's social standing. Through him and others, she gained invitations to important gatherings, dinners, and balls. She dressed elegantly, carried herself with quiet dignity, and learned to use her social graces as tools of survival. Her children, Eugene and Hortense, were growing and beginning to form their own identities. Eugene would soon enter military service, while Hortense developed artistic talents and refined manners that would later place her at the center of court life. The period after the Reign of Terror was one of reinvention for Josephine. Though she had no formal power or wealth, she cultivated an image of elegance, mystery, and emotional depth. Her time in prison had aged her, and her features, once considered plain, now carried an air of worldliness. Her beauty was not in symmetry but in expression. The way she spoke, moved, and listened made people feel seen and valued. This magnetism would eventually catch the attention of a young and ambitious general, Napoleon Bonaparte. In the years to come, Josephine's life would transform yet again, this time on a grand imperial stage. But her ability to captivate, to endure, and to adapt had been forged long before, in the crucible of a failed marriage, political violence, and the shadow of the guillotine. The woman who had once been dismissed as a Creole outsider had survived the revolution, protected her children, and positioned herself within reach of the rising powers of France. These experiences, of betrayal, terror, loss, and perseverance, formed the emotional and psychological backbone of the Empress she would one day become. Before the crown and the coronation, there was survival. And before survival, there was the quiet resilience of a woman who refused to be broken by circumstance. After her release from prison in the summer of 1794, Josephine de Beauharnais found herself a widow with 2 children in a nation barely emerging from the bloody chaos of the Reign of Terror. Paris was exhausted, suspicious, and yet, despite the violence that had decimated its elite, it was once again beginning to stir with ambition, intrigue, and a hunger for pleasure. The aristocracy was bruised but not eradicated. The salons reopened, and elegant soirees once more echoed with the sound of music and whispered conversations. In this fractured but reviving world, Josephine re-emerged, not as a tragic figure but as a resilient, captivating, and increasingly central presence. Though she lacked financial stability, Josephine carried herself with quiet authority. Her grace, soft voice, and ability to adapt to the unspoken codes of shifting political landscapes made her stand out among both the survivors of the Ancien Regime and the ambitious men of the New Republic. Her imprisonment had aged her, but her beauty matured into something more compelling. Less about youthful allure, more about poise, emotional intelligence, and a mysterious charm shaped by hardship. She dressed elegantly even when her resources were meager, often borrowing or repurposing items to appear more affluent than she was. She possessed a natural talent for refinement and subtle seduction, not overt, but present in her smile, her laughter, her silences. She became a regular guest in the salons of the Thermidorian elite. These were not the same spaces as those of the pre-revolutionary aristocracy, but they were equally filled with ambition and calculation. Her closest connection was Paul Barras, one of the 5 powerful directors of the French government. Barras had a notorious reputation for corruption, indulgence, and manipulation, but he also had the power to make or destroy reputations. Their relationship, whether romantic or strategic or both, placed Josephine in the heart of post-terror influence. Through Barras and his circle, Josephine came to know financiers, generals, artists, and rising stars of the new order. She listened more than she spoke, offered comfort to those who had lost, and flattered those who aspired to gain. In a society where alliances were fluid and danger was never far off, Josephine's survival strategy was social finesse. She formed romantic relationships, some documented, others merely rumored, not out of idle passion, but as part of her constant navigation of Parisian power structures. She was linked to several men, including influential military officers and politicians, but few of these affairs were scandalous by the standards of the time. Women like Josephine, who had lost their husbands and their fortunes, often turned to charm, companionship, and social grace as their most powerful tools. Her behavior was neither reckless nor crude. It was measured, elegant, and always carried out with a sense of discretion that left her dignity intact. These romantic liaisons served another function beyond emotional or material gain. They reinforced her visibility and mystique. Paris had become a city that prized reinvention, and Josephine was among its most successful stories of transformation. She was not a figure of tragedy, but of sophistication. She hosted small salons of her own, gathered artists and musicians around her, and offered her home as a space of calm conversation and flirtation. She was not wealthy, but she made her environment feel luxurious. Visitors often noted the taste with which she arranged her modest lodgings, flowers, perfumed candles, carefully chosen fabrics, and the warmth with which she welcomed guests. Meanwhile, her children began to grow into their roles. Eugene, now a teenager, was beginning to develop the qualities that would later make him a valued soldier and loyal servant of the empire. Hortense, graceful and sensitive, absorbed the art of courtly life from her mother. Josephine never stopped protecting them, but she also recognized the need to position herself and her family within the ascending order. The revolutionary purges had ended, but France remained unstable. The Directory ruled precariously, and the military had become the strongest pillar of government. It was in this new environment, filled with ambitious officers and political maneuvering, that Josephine encountered the man who would shape the rest of her life, Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon was not yet the towering figure he would become. In 1795, he was a rising artillery general from Corsica, known in military circles for his intellect, intensity, and sharp tactical mind. He had recently quelled a royalist uprising in Paris, earning the favor of the Directory. Paul Barras, seeking to reward the young officer and solidify political connections, introduced Napoleon to Josephine. Their first meeting was, by most accounts, unremarkable. Josephine was 10 years older, elegant, worldly, and used to the flirtations of men in power. Napoleon, by contrast, was awkward in social settings, intense in speech, and immediately captivated by her. To Napoleon, Josephine was everything he was not: refined, connected, experienced in the ways of aristocratic and political life. He was drawn not only to her beauty but to her aura, calm, knowing, emotionally rich. To Josephine, however, Napoleon was a curious figure. His ambition was evident, but he lacked polish. He spoke with a heavy Corsican accent, dressed plainly, and seemed more soldier than suitor. In her letters to friends, she mentioned him with mild affection but without passion. He pursued her relentlessly, sending her fervent letters filled with declarations of love, longing, and devotion. Josephine, more reserved, hesitated. Her hesitation was not simply romantic. Marriage, for her, was a complex proposition. She had already experienced the unhappiness and disappointment of her first union. She now had her freedom, her circle, and some degree of stability. Napoleon's obsessive love, though flattering, seemed almost too intense. Yet she recognized something in him, a man who would rise quickly, who had the backing of the powerful, and who might one day change the course of history. Friends and allies, including Barras, encouraged the match. For Napoleon, Josephine was a symbol of legitimacy, of entrance into elite society. For Josephine, he was a ticket into the future, into a place of renewed influence and perhaps eventual security. Their courtship progressed rapidly. Napoleon continued to write her with a feverish desperation, calling her his sweet Josephine and begging for her affection. He was often away on military campaigns or official duties, but his letters came frequently, each more passionate than the last. Josephine responded with warmth, but also with a measure of detachment. She was cautious with her emotions, guarding herself against being consumed. Despite their emotional imbalance, or perhaps because of it, they agreed to marry. On March 9, 1796, Josephine and Napoleon were wed in a civil ceremony in Paris. The marriage was modest and, by some reports, slightly irregular. The official documents misstated Josephine's age by several years. Whether by accident or by her own design is unclear. Napoleon left just 2 days later to command the French army in Italy. Their honeymoon, such as it was, consisted of more letters than embraces. While Josephine remained in Paris, Napoleon wrote her obsessively, describing his love, his longing, and his belief that she was the very center of his life. She responded with affectionate, if cooler, replies, often distracted by her social life and responsibilities. This emotional asymmetry became a defining characteristic of their relationship. Napoleon adored Josephine with a devotion that bordered on spiritual need. Her approval soothed him, her distance tormented him. He was possessive, jealous, and easily wounded by rumors of infidelity. Josephine, meanwhile, cherished her independence. She enjoyed the attention of others, not always romantically but as a means of feeling valued, admired, and alive. Napoleon's letters from the Italian campaign reveal his growing insecurity and suspicion. He accused her of indifference, of entertaining other men, of not writing enough. Josephine tried to reassure him, but her words could not match his hunger for emotional intensity. Despite these tensions, their union began to carry political weight. As Napoleon's star rose on the battlefield, Josephine's position in Paris elevated. She received diplomats, courtiers, and artists. Her home became a center of elegance and diplomacy, a soft power complement to her husband's growing military fame. She managed correspondence, received gifts from foreign dignitaries, and began to shape a reputation as a future queen, even before there was a crown. Their marriage was complex, shaped by contrasts, his fire and her calm, his ambition and her experience, his youth and her maturity. They were not equals in temperament, but they were partners in destiny. Over time, Josephine began to see not just the soldier in Napoleon, but the visionary. She understood his dreams, even when they terrified her. She watched as he transformed from general to ruler, and she adapted herself again. This time, not for survival, but for empire. In those early years before the imperial titles and palaces, their bond was forged not in romance alone, but in the shared experience of transformation. Each had emerged from the chaos of revolution, scarred, refined, and eager to ascend. Josephine had known terror, loss, and love before him. Napoleon would give her a throne, but she gave him what he had long craved: acceptance, elegance, and the reflection of power in its most human form. Their union would face storms, betrayals, and ultimate separation, but for now it was the beginning of something new. Not just a marriage, but a myth in the making. In the late 1790s and early 1800s, Napoleon Bonaparte's rapid ascent on the battlefield was matched by his growing political ambitions. As he achieved success after success in Italy, Egypt, and beyond, his fame swelled across France and Europe. Yet behind the victorious general stood Josephine, elegant, poised, and increasingly central to the public image of power. Their union, once uncertain and marked by emotional imbalance, evolved into a dynamic and public alliance. Together, they became one of Europe's most iconic couples. She, the charming and socially gifted consort, he, the genius of war and politics. Together, they embodied a new kind of aristocracy born not of ancient lineage, but of charisma, calculation, and conquest. While Napoleon marched across foreign lands, Josephine remained in France, assuming a different but no less significant role. She became not only the steward of their household and children, but a political hostess of rare skill. In Paris, she hosted salons and receptions where alliances were formed, whispers exchanged, and reputations made or destroyed. Diplomats, financiers, generals, and writers passed through her doors. Her ability to navigate rival factions, Jacobins, Royalists, Bonapartists, and opportunists, made her an invaluable bridge between old France and the new empire that was slowly taking shape. She did not simply entertain, she influenced. Her words were measured, her favors carefully granted. She listened, observed, and passed on insights to Napoleon in her letters and conversations. Though not a politician in the formal sense, she understood people, what they wanted, feared, and hoped to gain. Napoleon trusted her judgment even as he grew suspicious of her affections. His letters from the battlefield remained intense, longing, and sometimes accusing. He demanded loyalty, constancy, and love. She offered admiration and partnership, though not always with the romantic intensity he craved. Their correspondence during these years provides a window into their bond. Napoleon's letters were often filled with emotional urgency, desperate to hear from her, jealous of her admirers, tormented by absence. "You do not write to me," he would say. "You have forgotten me." Josephine, ever diplomatic, responded with grace, sometimes delaying her letters or softening her replies. She cared for him, but she also guarded her freedom. Her life in Paris was rich with attention, and she had admirers, not all romantic but certainly influential. She enjoyed fashion, society, and the beauty of her surroundings. She loved her children, who were growing into adulthood and preparing for their own futures under her careful guidance. Rumors of affairs dogged both Josephine and Napoleon during this period. His were often with young women in the cities he conquered, casual, fleeting, and sometimes politically inconvenient. Josephine's were more speculative, often based on gossip rather than fact. Her charm and approachability made her a target of speculation. While some historians suggest that she may have had discreet liaisons, others argue that much of the talk stemmed from Napoleon's paranoia and the jealousy of political rivals. In any case, both managed to weather these storms, if not always gracefully. Napoleon, increasingly obsessed with the consolidation of power, began to see his marriage to Josephine as a foundational piece of his legitimacy. She was elegant, of noble descent, if not ancient, and popular among the French elite. She knew how to move through the world of diplomacy with grace, something he often lacked. As he plotted his transformation from first consul to emperor, Josephine stood beside him, not merely as a symbol of affection, but as a partner in a shared imperial dream. Their private relationship remained complicated, marked by passion, estrangement, reconciliation, and mutual dependency, but publicly they were a formidable pair. The events leading to the 1804 coronation were drenched in intrigue and orchestration. France, weary of revolution and chaos, was ready to embrace order, even if that order resembled monarchy. Napoleon maneuvered brilliantly, using victories abroad, propaganda at home, and the failures of his enemies to justify the transformation of the Republic into an empire. In this vision, Josephine was to be Empress, not merely by title but by presence and demeanor. She had to represent continuity, grace, and national pride. Yet even as preparations for the coronation progressed, doubts lingered. Chief among them was the matter of legitimacy and succession. Napoleon, ever the strategist, worried that Josephine, already in her 40s, could not produce an heir. His advisors, some of his family, and members of court urged him to divorce and remarry a younger, fertile princess. Josephine was aware of these conversations. Her infertility, once a private pain, had become a political liability. She pleaded with Napoleon, begged his sisters for support, and sought allies among the court. Her position was precarious, but her influence remained undeniable. At the heart of this period stood a deeply personal paradox. Napoleon loved Josephine, but he also knew that power demanded ruthlessness. For a time, love triumphed. The coronation went ahead with Josephine at his side. The ceremony, held at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris on December 2, 1804, was a masterpiece of symbolism and spectacle. Unlike traditional monarchs who were crowned by the Pope, Napoleon took the crown from Pope Pius VI's hands and placed it upon his own head, an assertion that his authority came not from God or tradition but from himself. He then crowned Josephine, placing the diadem on her brow as she knelt before him. The moment, immortalized in paintings and eyewitness accounts, symbolized not just the unity of the couple, but the union of love and ambition, romance and empire. Behind the scenes, Josephine had fought hard for this moment. Her charm had swayed Napoleon's hesitation. Her tears had softened his logic. She even agreed to a last-minute religious wedding ceremony. Napoleon's mother had long disapproved of their civil-only marriage. The ceremony, conducted in secrecy the night before the coronation, was another concession Josephine made to preserve her place by his side. Her enemies were many, including members of Napoleon's own family, who viewed her as a hindrance to dynastic succession. But for now, she was Empress, crowned and radiant, a symbol of France's transformation. As Empress, Josephine elevated the tone and decorum of the new court. She restored many aristocratic traditions, but infused them with a modern sense of taste and civility. She set trends in fashion, interior design, and etiquette. Her love for roses, exotic animals, and fine fabrics turned Malmaison, her private estate, into a retreat of beauty and innovation. She supported artists, florists, writers, and scientists. Her salons brought together intellect and charm, politics and poetry. While Napoleon focused on conquest, Josephine shaped culture. Yet her position was never entirely secure. The absence of an heir loomed larger with each passing year. Napoleon's victories multiplied, and his empire expanded across much of Europe, but the question of succession remained unresolved. Josephine's children, Eugene and Hortense, were loyal and capable, but they were not of Bonaparte blood. Napoleon's family, particularly his siblings, pushed for a new marriage. They viewed Josephine as a political liability, graceful and beloved, yes, but ultimately barren. Despite all this, Napoleon clung to her. Their relationship, complex as it was, had matured into something more than romance. They had suffered together, risen together, and shaped an era side by side. Josephine understood the burdens of rule in a way few others did. She offered Napoleon a kind of emotional grounding, however imperfect, and a companion with whom he shared history, memories, and identity. Even foreign observers took note of Josephine's presence. Ambassadors remarked on her demeanor, her ability to diffuse tension, her calming effect on Napoleon's tempestuous moods. She had an instinctive sense of timing and tone. She did not speak too much nor too little. She rarely interfered directly in politics, but her subtle influence could tilt decisions. She became a symbol of France's new monarchy, not aloof like the Bourbons, but familiar and relatable. Her journey from a plantation in Martinique to the throne of Europe captured the imagination of many. Despite her achievements and the depth of their connection, Josephine lived with the constant fear of losing everything. She knew that her inability to bear a child had become the elephant in every royal room. She knew that Napoleon's love, though vast, was not always enough to quiet his ambition. She maintained her grace, but she prepared herself, quietly, for the day when she might be asked to step aside. That day was coming. But during these years, those golden years of empire and partnership, Josephine reigned with a beauty that was more than skin deep. She was not simply Napoleon's wife, she was his mirror, his muse, and in many ways his equal. She brought elegance to power, warmth to ambition, and humanity to empire. Together they had changed the world, not just with armies and laws, but with gestures, glances, and the shared dream of becoming something larger than themselves. At the height of the French Empire, Josephine Bonaparte stood as a figure of grace and power within the glittering but treacherous world of the imperial court. As Empress, she was expected to embody the grandeur of the empire while adhering to a delicate balance of personal restraint and public extravagance. The court of Napoleon was a grand stage upon which Josephine played her part with remarkable finesse, even as the political tides shifted around her. Though she lacked a formal political role, her presence shaped the tone of the regime, and her taste influenced the culture of an entire continent. Her court was not merely ceremonial. It was a platform of diplomacy, elegance, and power struggles where the Empress ruled with charm rather than edicts. Josephine understood from the outset that appearances at court mattered deeply. The pomp and protocol of the empire were used to reinforce Napoleon's authority, and Josephine added a necessary softness to that rigid masculine power. She redefined the role of an empress in a post-revolutionary society that was still sensitive to excess and inequality. Her public image had to be above reproach, and so she adorned herself in the finest garments, patronized skilled artisans, and ensured that the court exuded order, luxury, and refinement. Her style was admired and imitated throughout Europe. Dresses were often made of delicate muslin, adorned with embroidery and styled with Greco-Roman elegance. A stark contrast to the opulence of the former Bourbon court, but no less powerful in its statement. Josephine's influence over fashion was immense. Designers, jewelers, and perfumers vied for her attention. She popularized the empire waist dress, light fabrics, and natural silhouettes that emphasized grace over ostentation. Even her love of floral scents and delicate perfumes led to an entire industry of perfumers rising to fame. Her passion for botanical gardens, especially her own at Malmaison, brought exotic plants to France from colonies and faraway lands. She sponsored botanical expeditions, cultivated rare species, and turned her estate into a living museum of flora. Visitors from across Europe came to admire not only the gardens but the woman behind them, who had elevated horticulture to an imperial art form. Art, too, found in Josephine a discerning and generous patron. She supported painters, sculptors, and decorators who transformed the visual identity of Napoleonic France. Her salons included artists and thinkers, providing them with both patronage and the prestige of imperial endorsement. Many of the furnishings and works of art from her collections now reside in national museums, a testament to her lasting impact on the decorative arts. Through her taste and investment, she shaped the aesthetic of an era, what is now referred to as the Empire style, characterized by classical motifs, rich textures, and symmetrical designs. Despite her refined image, Josephine's court life was not without danger. Rivals surrounded her. Many of Napoleon's siblings, particularly his sister Caroline, resented her. They considered her influence a threat to their own ambitions and constantly sought to undermine her. Courtiers whispered about her past, her fertility, and her worthiness to be empress. Rumors and intrigues flourished, and Josephine had to walk a constant tightrope between appearing gracious and defending her position. She did not wield political power directly, but her survival depended on her ability to maintain Napoleon's favor, suppress court gossip, and outmaneuver her critics with tact. She had allies too, ministers, generals, and socialites who appreciated her civility and intelligence. Many saw her as a stabilizing presence in Napoleon's turbulent life. She could calm his temper, offer practical advice, and play mediator between competing factions. Her relationship with Talleyrand, the shrewd diplomat, was cordial and strategic. He recognized her value in smoothing diplomatic relations and solidifying alliances. Foreign ambassadors frequently noted how her elegance and empathy made the imperial court more approachable, even humane. While Napoleon traveled for war and diplomacy, Josephine kept the heart of the court beating. Receptions, ceremonies, and state functions were meticulously managed under her eye. She appeared in public with perfect poise, knowing that every gesture could be interpreted as symbolic. Her personal life was under constant scrutiny. She coped with it all through ritual, routine, and a well-maintained inner circle. Loyalty was rewarded with lifelong friendship. Betrayal, though not punished overtly, often resulted in social exile. Josephine knew how to wield soft power, and in the political climate of her time, that was no small feat. Yet the shadow of childlessness remained. While Napoleon's empire expanded, his desperation for an heir intensified. Josephine's fertility had long since faded, and though she loved her children from her first marriage deeply, they were not of Bonaparte blood. She was keenly aware of her vulnerability. Her court, once a sanctuary of refinement and civility, became increasingly tense with the weight of that looming question. Would she be cast aside? Even so, she carried herself with dignity, determined to fulfill her role as empress to the fullest until the very last. That role extended beyond fashion and festivities to something even more enduring, motherhood. Josephine's maternal instincts shaped not only the lives of her biological children, Eugene and Hortense, but also influenced the broader Bonaparte family and dynastic politics. She had given birth to Eugene and Hortense during her first marriage to Alexander de Beauharnais. After his execution during the Reign of Terror, Josephine had raised her children with devotion and determination, ensuring they received the education and opportunities befitting their talents. Eugene, intelligent and level-headed, became one of Napoleon's most trusted generals and viceroy of Italy. He was beloved by his stepfather and respected by the army, known for both his leadership and his loyalty. Josephine took great pride in his success, seeing in him a reflection of her own sacrifices and perseverance. She nurtured his political ambitions, but also sought to keep him grounded, reminding him often of the family's past sufferings and the volatility of fortune. Hortense, graceful and talented, was similarly a source of joy and anxiety for Josephine. She arranged her marriage to Louis Bonaparte, Napoleon's brother, hoping to secure her daughter's position in the new dynasty. The marriage, however, proved unhappy. Louis was moody and domineering, while Hortense was vivacious and free-spirited. Still, from this union came a child who would play a monumental role in history: Napoleon III, the future Emperor of France. Though Josephine did not live to see her grandson's rise to power, her maternal legacy, through Hortense, shaped the future of France for generations. Her relationship with Napoleon's extended family was fraught with complications. Most of the Bonapartes viewed Josephine as an outsider, a remnant of the old world, and a threat to their consolidation of power. His sisters in particular, including Caroline and Pauline, were jealous of Josephine's charm and access to the emperor. They accused her of manipulating Napoleon, of spending lavishly, and of keeping their brother from more strategic marital alliances. Josephine, however, maintained a policy of cautious diplomacy. She rarely confronted them directly, preferring instead to let her grace speak for her. Josephine also played a maternal role for Napoleon's siblings and their children. She offered guidance, education, and even arranged marriages for several of them. Though she was often marginalized by their ambitions, She tried to foster a sense of unity in the increasingly fractured imperial family. She reminded them that image, elegance, and public support were crucial to sustaining the dynasty. Her efforts to soften the often cold or erratic behavior of Napoleon's relatives earned her quiet gratitude from some, though open admiration was rare. Through her children, Josephine influenced the dynastic shape of Europe. Eugene married Princess Augusta of Bavaria, cementing ties with the German states. Hortense, through her unhappy marriage, contributed to the Bonaparte lineage with a son who would restore the empire. Josephine's bloodline, if not her name, continued to shape France well beyond her own lifetime. Even in exile, Napoleon would come to regret their separation, speaking fondly of her and acknowledging her lasting contribution to his legacy. In her maternal role, Josephine blended affection with ambition. She was fiercely protective, but never overbearing. She guided with subtlety and empowered her children to find their own place in the world. She saw the fragility of status and sought to instill in Eugene and Hortense a sense of duty, grace, and adaptability. Her upbringing of them reflected her belief that legacy was not just about titles or thrones. It was about character, dignity, and the ability to endure. Josephine's legacy, therefore, cannot be fully understood without appreciating her role as mother and stepmother. She raised children who would carry the dreams of empire into new generations. She created alliances not merely through diplomacy, but through family. Her influence extended beyond the court and beyond her time. It lingered in gardens, paintings, royal airs, and memoirs. She was not only the Empress of France, but the matriarch of a dynasty shaped as much by her refinement as by Napoleon's might. Her life was a testament to the power of motherhood, not just to nurture but to guide, elevate, and endure through the shifting tides of history. In the glittering palace halls and among the opulent chandeliers of the French Empire, a storm was quietly brewing, one that would challenge the very foundation of Josephine and Napoleon's union. For all their passion and political brilliance, the couple was facing a dilemma no crown or conquest could solve: the absence of a legitimate heir. As Napoleon's empire expanded and his throne solidified, the matter of succession became increasingly urgent. The strain of infertility, long a private sorrow between the two, began to swell into a public crisis, with advisors, family members, and political allies applying pressure from all sides. Napoleon, once consumed by love and nearly irrational desire for Josephine, had over time grown more pragmatic. Though he still admired her wit, elegance, and charm, he was now Emperor of the French, and his legacy needed permanence. Without an heir, all he had built might vanish upon his death. The childlessness, once a private matter whispered about in inner circles, now took center stage in council meetings and diplomatic discussions. Ministers such as Talleyrand and Fouché began quietly supporting the idea of annulment, while members of Napoleon's own family, who had long resented Josephine, seized the opportunity to call for her removal. Josephine, aware of her infertility and the shifting tides, lived in a state of emotional conflict. She had once hoped, early in her marriage to Napoleon, that she might conceive. But after several false hopes and miscarriages, the truth became undeniable. Her sorrow was compounded by guilt. She loved Napoleon, not just the man but the dream they had built together. To see that dream now threatened by her own inability to bear children was devastating. Each time a court physician left her chambers, each time a hopeful remedy failed, she drew deeper into herself. The court buzzed with rumors. Nobles speculated on who might replace her. Napoleon's sister Caroline was rumored to be plotting against her, constantly suggesting new brides: Austrian archduchesses, Spanish princesses, Russian nobility. Josephine felt increasingly isolated. Her former allies became cautious. Her staff walked with quiet steps. Every whisper in the corridor, every glance at her empty cradle-shaped chaise, became a reminder of what she could not give. The tension with Napoleon also began to show. The man who once wrote feverish letters from the front lines now grew cold and distant. Though he still showed affection in public, in private their silences grew longer, their conversations more formal. Josephine, always dignified, tried to maintain a facade of peace and poise, but the emotional toll was severe. She wept in solitude, her friends reporting long periods of melancholy, of walking in the gardens with no joy, of sketching and writing with absent eyes. She poured her sadness into her letters, her diary, and her care for her children and grandchildren. Still, nothing could distract her from the looming inevitability of the divorce. When the decision finally came, it was framed as an act of duty, not betrayal. Napoleon presented it to her not as a personal failure, but as a necessary sacrifice for the good of France. He needed an heir, he said, and she, being unable to provide one, must allow him to remarry. The very logic of empire, the very reason Josephine had once been crowned empress, now demanded her removal. It was not treason, it was necessity. And Josephine, to her eternal credit, accepted it with grace, even if it broke her heart. The divorce was conducted with all the drama and solemnity of a royal tragedy. It was held at the Tuileries Palace on December 15, 1809, in the presence of the court and the imperial family. Both Napoleon and Josephine read prepared statements. Hers was filled with sorrow and loyalty. She declared her love for Napoleon, her pride in having shared his glory, and her acceptance of her fate for the good of the state. Napoleon's statement was formal, almost cold by comparison, but he did acknowledge her kindness, her support, and her devotion over the years. Those present wept openly. The ceremony was not merely the dissolution of a marriage, it was the end of an era. The emperor and empress, once the power couple of Europe, were now parting for reasons bigger than love. Josephine left the palace not in disgrace, but with her head high, her legacy intact. She was granted titles, lands, and income. Most importantly, she was allowed to keep Malmaison, her beloved retreat near Paris, where she would spend. Retreating to Malmaison was both a comfort and a sorrow for Josephine. The chateau, once a haven during the early days of her marriage, now became her sanctuary in solitude. There she surrounded herself with art, rare plants, books, and the company of trusted friends. The once vibrant empress now lived a quieter life, but not one without meaning. She turned her attention back to the gardens she had cultivated with such care, expanding her botanical collection, hosting horticulturalists, and indulging in the tranquil beauty of nature. Malmaison became a symbol of Josephine's resilience. Though she no longer held court in the imperial sense, her salon was still frequented by diplomats, artists, and foreign dignitaries. Her reputation for elegance and insight had not faded, and many continued to seek her counsel. Even members of the Bonaparte family, especially her stepchildren and grandchildren, came to visit her, seeing in her a calm and kind matriarch. The rooms of Malmaison echoed not with the political intrigues of the Tuileries, but with laughter, piano music, and the gentle rustle of wind through garden leaves. Despite the divorce, Josephine and Napoleon never truly severed emotional ties. They continued to write to one another, their letters filled with nostalgia and occasional sorrow. Napoleon, even in the midst of his second marriage to Marie-Louise of Austria, often inquired after Josephine's health and well-being. He sent her gifts, shared news of the court, and confessed his lingering affection. Josephine, in turn, watched his triumphs and defeats from afar. She knew him as few others did, not just as the emperor, but as the man who had once burned with such impossible passion for her. As time wore on and Napoleon's fortunes waned, Josephine remained steadfast. She did not revel in his failures, nor did she seek to exploit their past. She remained dignified, loyal to his memory even as his empire crumbled. When he was finally exiled to Elba and later to St. Helena, it was said that among the few portraits he kept was one of Josephine. His last words reportedly included her name, a testament to the enduring place she held in his heart. Josephine's final years were serene but touched by sadness. She suffered from ill health, the years of emotional strain and the cold climate at Malmaison taking their toll. She remained engaged with the world, reading newspapers, hosting guests, and tending to her roses, but her strength was fading. In May 1814, after catching a chill during a walk in the garden with Tsar Alexander I of Russia, who had visited her with admiration and respect, she fell seriously ill. A few days later, on May 29th, she died peacefully in her bed at Malmaison, surrounded by loved ones. Her death was mourned widely, not just in France but across Europe. For many, she had come to symbolize grace under pressure, loyalty in the face of adversity, and the enduring power of feminine influence. She was buried in the church of Saint Pierre Saint Paul in Rouen, close to her beloved Malmaison. Her tomb bears a simple inscription, but her legacy lives on in more than just marble. Josephine Bonaparte's story is one of love, loss, sacrifice, and reinvention. She rose from the plantations of Martinique to become Empress of the French, only to be cast aside for the sake of an empire she helped build. Yet she never lost her dignity. Through her children, her style, her patronage, and her quiet strength, she left a mark that outlasted Napoleon's wars and ambitions. She was not merely an ornament to power. She was a force of refinement, humanity, and subtle leadership in a world dominated by men and militarism. In the end, Josephine was loved, not just by Napoleon, but by the people who saw in her a rare blend of vulnerability and strength. Her life was shaped by fate and politics, but defined by her own grace. Her name, though eclipsed by the grandeur of the Bonaparte legacy, still resonates with anyone who understands that empires may fall, but true elegance is eternal. Following her divorce from Napoleon in 1810, Josephine Bonaparte's influence in European diplomacy and politics remained significant. Her charm and social acumen continued to make her a valuable figure in diplomatic circles. She maintained cordial relationships with various European monarchs and dignitaries, often hosting them at her residence, Malmaison. Notably, her interactions with Tsar Alexander I of Russia were marked by mutual respect and admiration. Their meeting in 1814, shortly before her death, exemplified her enduring diplomatic relevance. As Napoleon's fortunes waned, culminating in his exile to Elba in 1814, Josephine was deeply affected. Despite their separation, she remained emotionally connected to him, expressing concern over his downfall. Her death on May 29, 1814, due to pneumonia, was a significant event that elicited widespread mourning across France and Europe. Napoleon, upon hearing of her passing, was reportedly devastated, secluding himself for days and expressing profound sorrow. Josephine's legacy extended beyond her lifetime. She was a patron of the arts, supporting artists like Antoine-Jean Gros and sculptor Antonio Canova. Her influence in fashion and horticulture was notable. Her gardens at Malmaison introduced exotic plants to France and set trends in landscape design. Through her children, particularly Hortense, who married Napoleon's brother Louis, Josephine became an ancestor to several European royal families, including Napoleon III. Her life and contributions continue to be reassessed, highlighting her role not just as an empress, but as a cultural and diplomatic figure of lasting impact. Josephine Bonaparte, born Marie-Joseph Rose Tacher de la Pagerie in 1763, experienced a life that unfolded against the dramatic backdrop of revolution, empire-building, and personal tragedy. Her journey was not only a path of personal evolution, but also one that intersected with the rise and fall of Napoleon Bonaparte, a man who would change the course of history. To understand her legacy, it is essential to look closely at her life, the moments that shaped her, and how her presence influenced not only Napoleon but the broader political and cultural landscape. Josephine's life began in the lush plantations of Martinique, where she was born to a wealthy Creole family. In 1779, at the age of 16, she married Alexander de Beauharnais, a French aristocrat. Their union produced 2 children, Eugene and Hortense. Despite their children, the marriage was troubled and strained, exacerbated by Alexander's infidelities and Josephine's own complex emotional world. In 1794, Alexander was executed during the Reign of Terror, leaving Josephine to navigate the turbulent political waters of revolutionary France. In 1795, Josephine met Napoleon Bonaparte, and their relationship quickly blossomed. They married in 1796, just as Napoleon's star was beginning to rise. Josephine was instrumental in helping Napoleon navigate the complex social and political structures of France. Her salons and social gatherings brought together key military figures, diplomats, and intellectuals. However, her inability to produce an heir caused strain in their marriage, and Napoleon ultimately divorced her in 1810 to marry Marie-Louise of Austria in hopes of securing a legitimate heir to the throne. Despite the divorce, Josephine remained a key figure in European diplomacy. She retained a cordial relationship with Napoleon, who continued to send her gifts and maintain correspondence with her. Josephine spent her final years at her beloved Château de Malmaison, where she hosted dignitaries and lived in relative solitude, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. Her death in 1814, shortly after Napoleon's exile to Elba, was deeply mourned. Napoleon's sorrow at her passing was profound, and he reportedly carried a portrait of her until his own death. Josephine's life is punctuated by her poignant letters and writings, which offer glimpses into her emotional world, her relationship with Napoleon, and her role in history. Napoleon's letters to Josephine are famously filled with passion and longing, particularly during his military campaigns. In his letters, Napoleon would often express his deep affection for her, even as he lamented her inability to provide him with a son. His words were often tender and filled with longing for her presence. One famous quote from Napoleon's letters reads, "I can't live without you, I think of you every moment. You are my only thought." Josephine, in contrast, expressed her feelings more privately. Her letters reveal a woman torn between duty and personal sacrifice. She wrote to Napoleon with a sense of grace and restraint, yet beneath the surface, there was deep vulnerability. In one of her letters, she confides, "My love for you is like the flame of a fire that will never go out, but I fear that the winds of fate may one day extinguish it." Contemporaries and historians have written extensively about Josephine's character and her impact on Napoleon. Some saw her as a clever political operator who helped advance Napoleon's cause, while others viewed her as a symbol of grace and refinement. Historian Vincent Cronin describes Josephine as a woman who lived at the crossroads of personal ambition and imperial destiny. Her letters and writings show her as both a loving wife and a woman who understood the political weight of her role. Over the years, Josephine has been the subject of numerous myths and misconceptions, particularly regarding her personal life and relationships. One of the most persistent rumors about Josephine was her alleged promiscuity. Some accounts suggest that she had numerous affairs before and during her marriage to Napoleon. However, many historians argue that while Josephine's relationships were a source of gossip, they were also influenced by the social and political norms of the time. It is clear that she used her charm and social skills to navigate complex political landscapes, which often involved personal connections with powerful men. In popular culture, Josephine has been depicted in a variety of ways. In films and novels, she is often portrayed as a romantic figure, a woman of beauty and grace who captivated Napoleon's heart. In some portrayals, she is shown as a tragic figure who suffers due to her inability to bear Napoleon's child. In others, she is a shrewd and ambitious woman who plays a significant role in shaping the future of France. These portrayals, while romanticizing aspects of her life, often overlook her deeper emotional struggles and the challenges she faced as a woman in a male-dominated world. The historical truth of Josephine's life is far more complex. While it is true that she had a series of relationships before her marriage to Napoleon, these were not uncommon for women of her time, especially those of noble or aristocratic birth. Josephine's marriage to Alexander de Beauharnais was itself a result of her need to secure her place in French society. When she met Napoleon, her charm and wit made her an ideal companion for a man who was rising rapidly through the ranks of the French military and political scene. Despite their differences, they formed a partnership that would change the course of history. Josephine's legacy has been the subject of much debate, particularly in terms of her role as a consort to Napoleon. While it is clear that she played a key part in his rise to power, her influence should not be reduced to merely supporting him as a political spouse. Josephine's charm, her understanding of court politics, and her ability to navigate the complex social fabric of revolutionary France were vital in shaping Napoleon's empire. Moreover, her patronage of the arts, fashion, and horticulture made her a cultural icon in her own right. Josephine Bonaparte's life was one marked by love, loss, resilience, and transformation. She was not just Napoleon's wife, but a key player in the creation of his empire. Her role in shaping Napoleon's court, her patronage of the arts, and her diplomatic efforts helped solidify the Bonaparte legacy in European history. Although her marriage to Napoleon ended in divorce, her influence on his life remained until her death. Napoleon's sorrow at her passing underscores the deep emotional connection they shared, a bond that transcended their political and personal differences. Josephine's legacy extends beyond her role as a consort. She was a woman who navigated the treacherous waters of revolution, empire, and personal tragedy with grace and dignity. Her life was not just defined by her marriage to Napoleon, but by her ability to influence the world around her. From her social gatherings at Malmaison to her contributions to French culture, Josephine shaped the world in ways that are still felt today. In the end, she was not merely a wife to an emperor, but a co-architect of an empire that would forever alter the course of history. Her story is one of strength, elegance, and enduring influence.